As you know, I'm Colombian, and Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the whole world. So I grew up surrounded by nature and loving nature, but I never thought growing up that I would dedicate my life to building a regenerative future. We are in the midst of a planetary crisis. We have reached 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. We're about to reach many tipping points. So we're in a pretty tough situation, right? But if we want to have a brighter, better, regenerative, equitable future, the one that I dream, the one that we deserve, the one that I'm sure everyone listening also dreams and deserves, we really need to start thinking of systemic change and doing things differently. So that's why I decided to leave the private sector, my career at AB InBev, to actually build my own company that could be a fractal of that systemic change.
I love that you focused on, you thought about building a regenerative future. Like, that is so progressive. Now it's sort of, common language, but, very early on in your career for you to think about, well, this is really what I want, for my country and globally, and, preserving ecosystems and so on. Welcome to the second season of Distilled. I'm Will Sarni from Water Foundry, an earth finance company. We have a very diverse group of water leaders, some of which you may not know, who are having a real impact in solving wicked water problems. Distilled is brought to you by KTM. You can find all of the episodes on Spotify and YouTube. Stay with us. This was, as expected, a magical conversation in many ways. And what I did know about Carolina was her passion, her background in journalism and storytelling, and it really came out. And some of the words that she used, I believe, are really, really impactful, and have very little to do with solutions, as she said, but really talking about the magic in creating a regenerative future. And if we can think about that and, be a catalyst for change, I think we have a shot at creating a better world and really rethinking things. Also, the second thing that really struck with me, which I will carry forward, is the need to pause and reflect. And because we're on a treadmill right now, and I'm not sure that the treadmill is headed in the right direction, and ensuring that we bring in some of the key issues. So those are my two big takeaways, and I have a wealth of other minor takeaways. But for me, those are the two things that I will carry forward and, as always, change my view of the world forever. So a big thanks to Carolina for being a magician in a world that desperately needs magic right now. I am so excited to have a dear friend and fellow troublemaker, unreasonable person, for this episode of Distilled. Carolina García Arbeláez, the co-founder of Myzelio, which we'll get into shortly. But Carolina, really very sincerely, thank you for being on this episode and venturing into a fun conversation on what's going on in the world of water and nature and, solutions to solve some of the big issues that that are challenging us. So thanks for being on.
Thank you, Will. I'm so excited to have this conversation. As I said, chatting with you is one of favorite things. And yes, ready to make some trouble and to make changes.
Sounds good. I know you're up for it. I've seen you in action. So Carolina, we usually start these conversations with, the origin stories. So, how did you, tell us where you grew up. Tell us how you got into this world of sustainability at large and water and nature focused initiatives. So yeah, just where would you like to begin?
Well, as you know, I'm Colombian, and Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the whole world. So I grew up surrounded by nature and loving nature, But I never thought growing up that I would dedicate my life to building a regenerative future. I think that growing up, I didn't know that we were facing this planetary crisis. But I was always drawn to social justice, and that's why I went to law school. And it was in law school that I realized and discovered that we were facing a global planetary crisis, that there were these multilateral movements trying to address climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. And I think I fell in love with that. I also fell in love with storytelling. While I was in law school, I was also doing a minor in journalism, which has been a passion that I have kept throughout my career. And once you discover your passion, it's impossible to leave it, right? So since law school, I decided to dedicate my life to building and fostering a regenerative future. And that took me through different avenues, many that I never thought that I would cross. I started my first job was at a media outlet, so covering environmental stories. Then I quickly joined the World Wildlife Fund and was part of the global delegation for the climate negotiations. It was a very interesting time because we were building all the advocacy strategy to adopt the Paris Agreement, which at the time, we're talking about 2013, at the time, it seemed impossible. It seemed like so hard to get consensus on a global climate accord. So it was an amazing opportunity to be there and learn when we were trying to adopt the Paris Agreement, the UN SDGs, and all these global frameworks that today are a North Star, but at the time seemed very, very difficult to achieve. And then after that, I never, ever expected or dreamt to be part of the private sector. But I think, well, really, like as a lawyer working with media and NGOs, the private sector was never a dream for me. But then I think working with so many non-state actors and understanding that the private sector is 70% of the world's GDP and employment, and also a big part of the problem, they needed to be part of the solution. And I had the intuition that I needed to learn from the private sector, understand how it worked. And then I trusted the universe. And fast forward, when AB InBev bought SAB Miller in Colombia, and they were looking for new people in their team, they reached out to me to see if I wanted to join their sustainability team in Colombia. And you know this very well, because when I accepted the role, I was, okay, I'm going to be like a panda undercover trying to see how these crazy people think. I took the offer as an anthropological experiment. And then fast forward, stayed there for 8 years, had a beautiful, beautiful journey there. I was able to be leading sustainability initiatives at a local level in Colombia, then at a regional level for Latin America, and then joined the global team. At the global team, had the wonderful adventure of working with innovators across the world when I was part of the 100 Plus Accelerator. And I think that entrepreneurial energy from so many startups inspired me to then build my company. And that's like a very short summary of the origin story back to where I am.
It's fascinating to me, and I learned a few things that I didn't know about you in terms of journalism and storytelling. But it now makes sense to me, and that you are, compelling as a speaker and, evangelist for change. I love that you focused on, you thought about building a regenerative future. Like, that is so progressive. I mean, it's, now it's sort of, common language, but, very early on in your career for you to think about, well, this is really what I want, for my country and globally, and, preserving ecosystems and so on. And by the way, I think you'll always be a panda, and take that as a compliment.
I will.
I believe that the panda is the most recognized logo in the world, which makes sense, is just so powerful. But anyway, so thanks for sharing your story in terms of how you got hooked and, your very diverse background, starting your career as an attorney and interested in journalism and storytelling. So tell me about Myzelio. And, I know that you're not a consulting firm. You are magicians. So I love that, by the way. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing and how that fits into what you're seeing right now with respect to water and biodiversity and a little bit about COP. And I know that you are very, very involved in that. So,
Well, I think to me right now, it's very, very important to think how we're going to bring on the systemic change that we need. We are in the midst of a planetary crisis. We have reached 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. We're about to reach many tipping points. So we're in a pretty tough situation, right? As part of humanity. And this is something that really keeps me awake at night. And I'm sure that we cannot continue doing the same things that we do to reach a different outcome, because that's basically insanity. So if we want to rethink, I think it's also a moment of a lot of fertility because there's so many possibilities. It's the world of possibilities, the world of opportunities to actually shape our future, right? But if we want to have a brighter, better, regenerative, equitable future, the one that I dream, the one that we deserve, the one that I'm sure everyone listening also dreams and deserves, we really need to start thinking of systemic change and doing things differently. So that's why I decided to leave the private sector, my career at AB InBev, to actually build my own company that could be a fractal of that systemic change. So Myzelio, first and foremost, it's a fractal of that systemic change. And we chose the name Myzelio. You might be wondering, so what's Myzelio? It is an invented word. It is a hybrid between the word in Spanish, Myzelio, and the word in English, mycelium, which for those that aren't aware, the mycelium network is the fungi thread underneath the soil that connects trees. And it's so magical to me because, trees, for example, they speak to each other. They share nutrients through the mycelium network. Paul Stamets, the famous mycologist that I always follow and admire, he says that the mycelium network is the internet of the universe. And I think it's really magical. And as you said, for me, magic is very important because in the midst of a planetary crisis where everything seems so catastrophic and hard to resolve, I think we need to build a lot of magic to actually reverse that. And that's why I tell the team that we are not consultants because we're not, that we are magicians. And I really want them to feel inspired about, the magic that they have in their hands to actually build what they thought wasn't possible. So we are beyond possible. We are trying to help other organizations radically boost their impact and support them to grow and thrive, but stay within planetary boundaries and help also the planet thrive. If you want me to get into the details, I can tell you exactly what we do.
Please do, by the way. And I want to come back to some of the language that you're using, which, I believe you and I have talked about this, that language is so important. I mean, how do you communicate and inspire people and mobilize people for change? That is just so critically important. So tell me a little bit more about the details of, what are you focused on as magicians and what does systemic change look like? And then also if you can weave in a little bit, a download on COP, that would be really helpful.
Of course. So on the one hand, we are testing different theories of change and working with different organizations. We are offering a model that, I don't know if we can call it sustainability as a service. Back to the storytelling, we're also trying to fine-tune the wording for everything that we do. But this means that when we partner with fast-growing organizations that have visionary leaders, because we also want to work with leaders with a vision, they can fully outsource their sustainability teams with us. So we become their chief sustainability officers, we build their strategies, but we implement those strategies alongside them. We become their dream team, basically. And that we're doing with those companies that are growing fast, but still don't have like giant supply chains like the Fortune 500, let's say. So, for example, take for instance one of our first clients. It's called Devotion. It's a coffee company. They have 6 coffee shops in New York, 6 coffee houses in New York. They are Colombian, and so that makes us really proud. They are a B certified company, and they are growing very fast, but they are still not Starbucks, you know? So I love working with these companies because they have the plasticity to make changes early on and change their value chain and to grow within planetary boundaries. So that's what we're doing with like emerging corporate leaders, emerging companies. However, we also need to work with the big ones, right? But the pain point is completely different. They also have sustainability teams, so they don't require to outsource that. But sometimes they don't have the bandwidth to do the impact that they should or that they dream of doing.
Right.
So what we do is that we come along, we co-create high impact initiatives with them, but different to traditional consultants that leave the plan set on. We actually, and then say goodbye, good luck. we actually implement those plans alongside them. So we also become their dream team. So take, for instance, we're working with PepsiCo and we are rebuilding their water strategy for Latin America and helping them build a multi-stakeholder water program that can start in Mexico and cover several basins and then can be used as a best practice and as a platform, and we can take over to other Latin American countries. And for us, that's very important because, you know, I've been on the other side of the coin working for a large corporate and know how little bandwidth they have sometimes to execute a high impact projects.
You reminded me of something. You talk about Devotion, a Colombian coffee company with shops in New York, and the power of a privately held company to do things that are, I would say, not necessarily more challenging for, a publicly traded company, but, they can be very nimble and very impactful. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of their culture and how they view some of these, critical sustainability issues, obviously with their supply chain and also, are you doing any magic with respect to, and I will always focus on that now, how they're engaging with their customers? Is that part of your magic with them at all?
Yes, of course. So on the one hand, I think you just touched a very important point. And I think privately owned companies haven't had the same public scrutiny as publicly traded companies. So in some level, they are lagging behind in many cases. However, because they are privately owned and they also have the legacy as part of their core, I think legacy for privately owned companies is even more entrenched than for publicly traded ones. And that's a big intuition that I have. They are also willing to make more courageous decisions because they're thinking like in the real long term. So I think there's a big opportunity working with privately owned companies. And you can see it, like, Patagonia is obviously a company that always comes to mind when we're thinking of sustainability champions and people willing to take risks and go above and beyond. The things that Yvon Chouinard has been able to put through would have been impossible at a publicly traded company that has so many shareholders and public scrutiny. So I think there's a big opportunity there. And we have seen this working with several privately owned companies that have outsourced their sustainability teams with us, and we have seen how bold their leaders can be when they are also the owners in charge of leading the company on its own. And with Devoción, yeah, it has been amazing, this journey with them. I'm so grateful for them to trust us with this model. They are truly a visionary company, and something that I've loved working with them is how open they are to foster change. Like, we're in the middle of like getting them certified with a science-based target, something that they didn't have for their climate agenda, for example. And immediately the reaction was, yes, let's do it. And they are willing to test different models. And if you think about consumers, we're actually and I'll tell you about the results later. But we're going to start testing a little bit of behavioral change with consumers on the e-commerce platform.
Oh, wow.
To see whether we have better results when consumers that purchase on the e-commerce platform that want to offset the carbon footprint, when Devotion matches the investment, we want to see how many consumers actually engage with that platform. So we are working with different initiatives to see how the consumer can be part of the sustainability journey of Devoción. But many of those initiatives we're cooking them right now. So I'll get you the interesting results soon enough.
Okay, so as a magician, I now have a visual image of you with a cauldron, basically stirring up some, potion that'll activate this. I really do love that you're focused on the consumer. I think we all know that, if we're really going to make progress, we need to engage with the layperson and increase, awareness of the issues and essentially mobilize them. Really, really interesting. So tell me a little bit about COP. There was, obviously no shortage of chatter in social media and reports that came out around COP. But what was your takeaway or takeaways from COP? Are you hopeful, or you're always hopeful, but I mean, tell me.
Well, know that I'm a stubborn optimist. I think in the world we are facing today, being hopeful and optimistic, it's no longer an option. It's a duty. We need to, because that's what gives you the joy and the drive to keep on pushing, which is the only alternative that we have.
Right.
But this COP was very, very special to me because, well, I told you I was a lawyer. I went to law school. Probably my international environmental law teacher has been my greatest mentor of all time. She still is. I still consult my decisions with her. She's amazing. And when I was in law school, taking for the first time my international environmental law course, she invited me to go with her and work with her at a COP in Colombia, but from the Basel Convention. That, I don't know if you're aware of the Basel Convention, but they basically regulate the movement of hazardous waste between countries. And that COP was being held in Colombia, in Cartagena. I cannot tell you the specific date, but this probably is 2010, 2011, so many, many years ago. And for me, it was super interesting. But that COP was, civil society. I remember that a couple of NGOs were there. A couple of folks from civil society were there. But it was truly, truly focused on the negotiations, very closed doors. And that was my first COP experience. I remember I was quite frustrated also to see how slow the process was, how discussions were stuck in the wording, well, of course, lawyers are always discussing the specific wordings. So that was my first COP ever. And then when I joined the World Wildlife Fund back in 2014, we started working for the plan for the Paris Agreement. I had already been to COP19 in Warsaw, climate COP in Warsaw. And then I worked very closely on COP20 Lima, COP21 Paris, then COP22 Marrakesh. And my life became super focused on these multilateral spaces, right? So I was going to the COPs, but I was also going to the intersessional meetings. And I remember back in the day, even though climate was big, that still the participation of the private sector and non-state actors was quite limited. You would see like same old suspects like Paul Pullman leading back in the day, but it wasn't as common to see all the companies out there. So after that, I joined the private sector, as you know, and stayed in AB InBev for 8 years. And I kind of left behind that world of multilateral agreements in my role at AB InBev. So going back to COP16 in Colombia, biodiversity COP, in my home country with my company, to see and to experience that world again was very important to me. And I was very impressed, not with the negotiations, and we can talk about the negotiations and the good, the bad, and the ugly, the progress made, what they missed. But what was super interesting to me, it was to see the massive, and I'm telling you, massive participation of civil society, including
Right.
indigenous groups, the private sector, the cities, the youth, so many people, to a point that you know how COP is divided sometimes between the green zone for civil society and the blue zone for the negotiations.
Right.
And it was the first time that a biodiversity COP had a green zone. And I think the government put a lot of effort in it. And, it was so lively, so full of events, so full of discussions, so full of experiences that I barely went into the blue zone, to be honest, because the green
Right.
zone was really rich. And for me, this is important because, of course, having a global biodiversity framework, agreeing on targets, agreeing on finance mechanisms, agreeing on reporting and monitoring, it is important. And we need to continue pushing that agenda. However, what the agency of governments is not the whole picture, right? There's so many
Right.
actors that can contribute and can play a very important role in reaching these targets. So to see that massive participation of many actors that 10 years ago would have never been there, for me,
Right.
I think it's a major success.
This is such a critical point about these convenings, that while, the negotiations move at a snail's pace and it feels like we're not making much progress, what's going on adjacent to the events is really where the action is and the progress. And, UN Water Week, and then most recently UN Climate Week, I just spent my time at side events and networking with, colleagues on, what can we do? What initiatives can we forge and implement? And for me, that's really inspiring. I mean, to your point, it's the stuff that's going on around it that will propel us forward and have a positive impact. I love that. I want to talk to you more about this, another call or when we get together in New York, whatever it may be. But, Caroline, any closing thoughts on magic in the world of a regenerative future and where we're headed? Give us a little magic here.
Back to the storytelling. We are a species that has grown and has built civilizations based on the stories that we tell to ourselves, to our community, right? We are homo narrans. Our stories shape our world. So we need better stories. We need to create space to imagine different possible futures. It is very hard. And I'm not sure if I told you this last time we saw each other, but imagine that we were having a conversation in the Middle Ages. And we were farmers in the Middle Ages, and someone told you, the rule of king is going to crumble and there's going to be democratic governments emerging. You would have said, impossible. Right. That's never going to happen, right? So we are also in a same situation. When someone tells you about different futures, you see them and sometimes you feel it's impossible to get there. But we are in the middle of a transition, and it's a transition where many possible outcomes are out there. So that's why we need to imagine and envision new futures. But in order to do that, I think we need to pause for a little while and give an open space for reflection. Because something that I fear
Wow.
right now is that we are in a solution mode, right? Because we're like, we've reached 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. We are in a planetary crisis. So we are in solution mode. So let's do biodiversity credits. Let's put more on renewable energy. Let's do reforestation projects. We are in solution mode. And that's important. But sometimes when you are in solution mode, you miss the reflection part of it, which is very important. And I think we are due to have a big reflection as society to understand what are the paradigms that we created in this society that led us to the planetary crisis, because otherwise we might be replacing one extraction model with another extraction model.
Right.
So for me, the magic, it's important, and it's going to happen if we start being disruptive about those very, very, very symptoms that were the basis of the planetary crisis. So that's
Right.
what we need to think all the time. And that's why I tell my team all the time that the work that we do with our amazing partners, with Devoción, with PepsiCo, with Marriott, it's important. But the most important project on its own, it's Myzelio, because we need to be that fractal of systemic change. And if we aren't that fractal of systemic change, how can we inspire our partners to be part of that systemic change?
You never fail to deliver. That was inspirational. So, Carolina, just to close and inspire listeners, just real quick, a recap of where you see the future with respect to water and nature.
I love that you are tying water and nature, because I see that future there. I think for the first time, and this is really, really interesting to me, we are starting to see things in a holistic way. You know, we used to see water, and if you look at many of the company's goals, it's super focused on replenishment and increasing water availability, but leaving other components behind. And I think companies and the world is changing their view to have a holistic approach, a landscape approach, an ecosystem approach where water, biodiversity, carbon, they're all tied together, and we are having integral solutions. So I think that's where we're heading. I hope that's where we're heading.
Well,
and we will continue, you and I, making the trouble to ensure that we're pushing that agenda, I'm sure.
I love it. Onward. Carolina, how do people reach you?
Well, we are now on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We have our webpage. So look for us, myzelio.com. Look for us on Instagram, on LinkedIn. And we're always happy to connect and build magic together. We're happy to be your partner in magic.
I love that. Okay, count me in.
Thank you,
Thank
Will.
you.
I'm counting on you. You know, you're partly responsible. You're one of the Myzelio. You're part of the Myzelio family, and
I love that. Happy to be part of this family.
Thank you.
All right. Be well.